All right, hello everyone. Welcome to Teaching 101, Online Teaching 101. And I'm going to be facilitating some early discussion with some of my co-hosts today, and we'll be passing back and forth. Let's go from there. Okay. We're going to give you some overall conceptual framework and then try to give you some practical tips. We're going to be talking a little bit about kind of comparing in-person and online teaching. We're going to be figuring out how to help you select your platform. We're going to have to help you think about designing a learning experience. And then we're going to be figuring out how you might be able to do a little bit more dynamic needs assessment from session to session, because knowing a lot of the folks on the call today are family physicians who are probably longitudinally able to integrate learning with their trainees. We will be talking about that. And we will be talking a little bit about a whole bunch of different technologies that are embedded in, but we can go over some of the specific requests that I'm seeing in the chat pop up right now. I've introduced our facilitators, but here they are: Sarah Law, myself, Yusuf Yilmaz, Alana Bear, and Catherine Tong. And so let's talk a little bit about the in-person versus online interactions. And in this, I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who will be kind of taking us through this part.
Thanks, Teresa. Okay, perfect. So a lot of us are very familiar with the in-person method of delivering education. But of course, as we move into this pandemic era, we don't know how long this is going to last. And so there is a lot of work right now in trying to have everyone understand the key differences between online and in-person environments. And in understanding the differences, understanding also how to adapt our teaching practices to best suit the needs of the learners and the content-specific requirements that we may need to take into consideration when we're designing different methods and strategies to do education. So when we look at the learners and we look at the educators, we do find that there are some key differentiators for what the online versus the in-person experiences would include. So when we think about learners, I'm sure that some of you have experienced this already, there is a significant change in the type of motivation, the type of discipline, self-direction, time management that's really required to excel in online education versus in-person education. A lot of the time, there's many more distractions that can be expected when someone is independently working on things in a virtual setting. They will require a lot more clear communication from the instructor, from the teaching assistants, to make sure that there is no ambiguity about what is anticipated, what is coming up, and how they need to interact with the course itself. And there's also a lot of difference in the social elements of the interactions. So now the nonverbal asynchronous communication is going to be of paramount importance. Discussions are going to be a little bit more on an even playing field. So there will be the ability to make sure that everyone's contributing a bit more and not relying so much on the dominant speakers in a session to contribute to the dialogue exclusively. And you find that there's just different engagement strategies that you need to use as an educator to make sure that everyone's feeling included and is actually engaged in the discussion and not just tuning in every once in a while. Now, for educators, it is a lot more about how do you navigate the educational experience for the learners? How do you give them tips and intrigue them and pull them into the learning experience as a whole? It's not simply about giving information as much anymore. It's about pointing to where they should be looking, pointing to what they should be paying attention to, and then helping through questions, helping through the assignments, the different tasks that you provide them to absorb as much of that as is actually possible. So I know that some of the elements that I'm discussing right now are simply elements of good teaching practice. However, some of the elements around communication, about clarity of expectations, around the format of educational content, if we do deliver educational content alongside the experience, it's even more important to be considering, plus, of course, the social elements and how that's different nowadays. All right, so just to reemphasize the key challenges and strategies for success. As I mentioned, there is a big difference between online and in-person environments. A lot more distraction, a lot more things that are happening within the learners' daily lives, and so you have to accommodate for that. Some learners will be personally affected by COVID-19. Some learners may be experiencing a lot of internet connectivity issues. Some learners may be needing to juggle a lot more work in their home lives, and so there's a lot of expectations that perhaps cannot be met as well anymore, simply because they are not isolated from those elements of their lives when in that classroom setting. So if we look at all of this, so trouble adapting, they may be disengaged, they lack the community that really reinforces things and helps stimulate their movement along, and sufficient feedback. We can also think about how can we develop workarounds. So when it comes to having trouble adapting, a lot of you may have noticed that there's a lot more questions, there's a lot more asks for clarification, there's a lot more investment that needs to be provided by the learning management platforms that we use and by ourselves and our support systems within the educational courses that we currently teach, to ensure that there is more communication than previously, and that the communication is extraordinarily clear in terms of what is anticipated. We also understand that because learners are disengaged, we have to find new ways of really intriguing them. And so there is a lot of strategy right now on gamifying things, diversifying the types of activities that learners are expected to engage in, and trying to give them a sense of progress in accumulating the knowledge, accumulating the skills that they need to be accumulating during this educational experience as they progress. So no longer just looking at a few points in time, but looking at multiple points in time to give them continuous feedback and thereby motivation to keep going. Thank you. And a lack of a learning community can be pretty simply kind of addressed by providing at least some synchronous interactions. I know it's quite simple relative to facilitating online interactions to simply post content, post resources, post videos, do didactic lecturing in an online format. However, there is a sense of loss for all the social engagements and social interactions that the learners were experiencing in an in-person session. And so if you look at beyond the social element, what does that actually do for the learners? Well, it creates more of a social commitment to keeping up with the content. It creates a group of people that they can discuss the learning objectives with. If there are any lack of clarity, they can now go and refine their understanding with their peers. And so even though it's social interactions that are missing, really that contributes so much to the learning experience that you should, and it's highly recommended that you replicate at least some portion of those social interactions through small group conversation, as we'll be discussing over Zoom, or peer-based activities, so that they get to really communicate with another person. In terms of insufficient feedback, we'll talk about this a little bit more later on in this talk, but because there is trouble with engagement, because there is constant availability of distractions, there is an increasing importance on giving individuals feedback on how they're doing, but not just from the instructor through grades, but also from reflection, through peer evaluations, through those social interactions, maybe some one-on-one sessions during office hours where they get to interact with the instructor or the TA, but just some level of feedback, qualitative, quantitative, so that they, again, get a sense of how they're doing. It sort of gamifies things in their heads if you structure it accordingly, but really at the end of the day, it's about continuously giving them information so that they understand that they're part of this experience and not just tuning in every once in a while.
So next thing we are going to talk about is a framework that we are working on. It's called SPACE, Social Personal Activity Corridor Education. So we have like 4 components on this framework so that you can design an online learning course and then maximize engagement and keep this in a long-term learning. So the first element in this space, social and personal interaction with your students, with your peers during the online learning. And you will be able to, using different kinds of features that Sarah just talked about it. Like we are gonna also experience them today in the breakout rooms, and then we will be discussing actively rather than you will be just listening like this, and then we will talk about more. And the second part of this space framework is the activity tools. We cannot do this without the activity tools because they are providing like different kinds of features so that we can engage learners as well as the you as an educator will be engaging the students in different ways of activity tools. And the third component is the digital corridor. So when we hang up with this synchronous communication, we will be needing some synchronous and asynchronous kind of platform so that we can keep up the communication. You can use different platforms, like learning management platforms is a way to do this. And we have at Mac Adaptive Learning A2L platform as a learning management platform, but we are also using Microsoft Teams and Slack for continuous interaction. And we know that there are lots of people using Facebook as well. So you can use Facebook Messenger, you can use WhatsApp groups, kind of things, so that you can support continuous communication with your learners. And the last part of the space is the educational delivery. So how you are gonna deliver your content, and which kind of platforms you will need during this session, because you will not just sending the content to students. You will be expecting them to providing some interaction as well. So like social and personal differences are here, Dr. Chen.
Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we cover, and actually put it in the acronym the space early because of the mnemonic just working out, but also because this is something that sometimes we forget as teachers to build in. And so we wanted to prioritize it and put it first. So I think making sure that you spend a little bit of that time in the beginning and plan for that 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the beginning, just to check in with the students, especially in these pandemic times. I think wellness is an issue for some. Being able to create a safe space where people do feel like they can talk about world events, especially since there's so many dramatic world events that have happened, I think is important. Creating a safe space and creating that ability to be able to connect people, I think is something we're all craving. And so while the world is not so open, having a little bit of that time programmed in so that you're not running over, but rather that you have the ability to chit chat and for people to ask questions and get off topic. I think the other thing would be figuring out how to engage in that personal and sometimes people do some icebreaker games, and I'm going to actually take us through one that is really, really quick right now. And it's just to ask you to participate with me in some movement activity. And so it's just to loosen people up. So what I want you to do is like take your hands and just stretch as hard, as far up as you can, and just really do that like morning stretch that you all need to do. Okay. And then now I want you to release it slowly on the count of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now do it one more time. Okay, ready? Because we're not good at the first time, right? Stretch all the way up to the top, and then just release. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And even just a little bit of movement like that when we've been sitting for a number of hours, when you're coming back from a break, little things like that to connect us to our real selves and not just our virtual selves. I think that's important. I think it's also like nice to know that depending on bandwidth and technology, some students might not be able to turn on their video, and so making sure that people know that it's okay, that they don't, that we prefer if at sometimes you think about turning on your video for certain interactive parts, and I will ask everyone to consider doing that in the breakout rooms. But in a lecture setting, it really doesn't matter. So don't pressure people to need to have their video on, because their bandwidth might not be able to take it, and there might be people in the background that they really don't want to be in line of sight. Also, it's good to bear in mind that not all trainees and students will always be comfortable with sharing their background. So if they have a good enough computer that can do virtual backgrounds, that is one way they can kind of like disguise things. But it might be that they don't want to show that they have to be in their bedroom or something like that. And so I think that's important. And then I think it's good to set a tone that, you know, I don't have any kids, but my partner sometimes pops in and says hi. But he'll tell you he's the biggest kid I could ever get, and we always laugh about that. But the idea would be that, you know, kids might Zoom bomb you from behind and pets might show up unexpectedly. And I think making sure that people know that that's an acceptable thing right now would be 100% okay, right? All of us have seen the BBC dad and his very, let's say, confident 4-year-old. She's much older now, but you know, we are all now that BBC dad, right? So definitely make sure that you have that conversation with folks so that they know that it's okay. And okay, we're going to pass it on to the next part, which is the activity zone. And so in this, it's about having a shared space. So for prepping this presentation at some point, Sarah, Elena, and myself all actually just hopped on a Zoom, and in the background, we sent each other a link in the chat, and we all collaborate on the same space. And so Yusuf will be taking you through platforms that you might be able to use to augment your teaching. I think the next thing would be the idea of a digital corridor and how we can actually create that. And Yusuf has described a bunch of different ways. And Elena, maybe you can speak to this actually. Elena, can you speak to your use of Microsoft Teams actually, because you'll be taking us through this section.
Sure. I'm going to be talking more about digital corridors when we go to the breakout rooms, but just to give you a little taste of it right now, when we had the switch over back in the spring, when we had to switch everything online, I also teach undergraduate anatomy, and we needed to switch our anatomy course online. So for us, the logical platform was Teams because it was accessible for all of us. McMaster has institutional licenses for it. And so we switched all of our synchronous communication and administrative activities over to Teams. And this screenshot here is from our student team for our TAs and our students in the course, where our TAs were now able to offer virtual office hours and be able to chat both synchronously and asynchronously with students. And what you're seeing on the screen is a snapshot of posts between students and a TA around content questions. And I'll talk a bit more about this in our breakout session.
All right, great, thank you.